My life began in a house where love was a currency I could never earn, a debt I was always repaying with my silence and my fear. I was born and raised in Cincinnati, in a small two-story house with a tidy lawn that lied to the whole world. It was a house of secrets, of whispers behind closed doors, and of a pain so deep it settled into the floorboards. My father, Tyler, was a man who took from me what no one has the right to take, and when my own body betrayed his secret, my mother, Nancy, beat me for the shame I brought upon her. They thought they had broken me, buried me alive in the quiet, suburban dread of their home. They didn't know that inside the terrified girl, a woman was learning how to survive, and survival, I have learned, is its own quiet, brutal form of revenge. From as early as I can remember, our home was governed by my father's moods. He was a storm cloud that was always on the horizon, and my mother and I were just two small boats, trying not to be capsized. Nancy's love was conditional, a reward for my obedience and my invisibility. "Don't bother your father, Margaret," she would hiss if I made too much noise. "You know how he gets." I knew. I knew the way his voice would drop low and cold, the way his eyes would fix on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. It started with small things, things a child can't name but can feel in her bones. He'd insist on tucking me into bed long after I was old enough. His hands would linger too long on my shoulder, his breath too close to my face. I would lie perfectly still, my eyes squeezed shut, praying for him to leave. When I would mention it to my mother, trying to explain the unease that coiled in my stomach, she would dismiss it with a sharp wave of her hand. "He's your father. He loves you. Stop being so dramatic." Her words were a dismissal, but also a warning. Your feelings are not valid here. Your discomfort is an inconvenience. The first time he crossed a line I could understand, I was 9 years old. He came into my room one night, the smell of whiskey on his breath, and sat on the edge of my bed. He told me I was his special girl, his secret keeper. He touched me in a way that made my blood run cold, and I froze, just like I had been taught to do. The silence was my shield. The next morning, I couldn't look at him at the breakfast table. I couldn't eat the grits my mother had made. She noticed my silence. "What is wrong with you today?" she asked, her voice tight with annoyance. I mumbled that I didn't feel well. Tyler looked at me from across the table, a small knowing smirk on his lips. "She's just looking for attention, Nancy," he said. And my mother, my own mother, agreed. She believed him. She always believed him. That day, I learned the most important rule of our house. My father's reality was the only one that mattered. My pain was a fiction, my fear an exaggeration. I was a prop in the play of their marriage, a daughter whose only role was to be quiet and compliant, no matter the cost. My childhood became a performance of normalcy. I got good grades. I was polite to the neighbors. I never caused any trouble at school. I built a fortress of invisibility around myself, hoping that if I was quiet enough, small enough, he would forget I was there. But he never forgot. The nights became a source of constant, low-grade terror. I would listen for his footsteps in the hall, my heart pounding in my chest. I learned to feign sleep, to control my breathing, to make myself as still as stone. The abuse became a routine, a dark secret that lived in the space between his touch and my mother's willful ignorance. She must have known. A mother always knows, but acknowledging it would have shattered the fragile illusion of her perfect life, her handsome husband, her well-behaved daughter. So she chose not to see. She chose to polish the furniture and bake meatloaf and pretend that the monster sleeping in her bed wasn't also devouring her daughter's soul, one quiet, terrible night at a time. The years of my girlhood bled into one another, each one marked by the same creeping dread, the same suffocating silence. My father's abuse was a constant, a dark undercurrent that shaped everything. It was in the way I learned to walk through the house on tiptoe, the way I flinched when a door closed too loudly, the way I avoided looking any man in the eye. School became my only sanctuary, a place where I could breathe air that wasn't thick with unspoken secret. I threw myself into my studies, finding a strange comfort in the logic of algebra and the clear narratives of history. I was a ghost in the hallways, a quiet girl who sat in the back of the class and never raised her hand unless called upon, but my grades were perfect. My teachers saw a diligent, if shy student. They didn't see the terror that lived behind my eyes. My mother, Nancy, saw my good grades as a reflection on her. "Margaret is so bright," she would tell her friends at church, her voice swelling with a pride that felt hollow and false. She loved the idea of me, the quiet, intelligent daughter who caused no trouble, because it validated her own choices. It proved that their family was a success. My achievements were another layer of paint on the rotting facade of our home. As I entered my teenage years, the abuse from my father changed. It became more possessive, more controlling. He hated when I started to develop, when my body began to change. He would make cruel comments about my clothes, my weight, anything that suggested I was becoming a woman. "You're getting sloppy, Margaret," he'd sneer if a shirt was too loose. "Tuck that in, have some self-respect." It was a twisted form of control, a way to keep me a child in his eyes, to keep me his. My mother's complicity grew alongside it. She would enforce his rules with a chilling efficiency. She'd inspect my outfits before I left for school, making me change if a skirt was a millimeter too short. "You don't want to give people the wrong idea," she'd say, her words echoing his. She was his enforcer, his loyal soldier, and I was their shared prisoner. The isolation was absolute. I wasn't allowed to have friends over. Sleepovers were out of the question. If I wanted to go to the movies, my father had to approve the film, the time, and who I was going with, which was usually no one. I spent my Friday nights in my room, with a book, listening to the muffled sounds of their television downstairs, feeling like the world was happening somewhere else, to other people. The injustice of it all began to fester inside me, a silent, impotent rage. I would lie in bed at night and imagine a different life, a life where my mother protected me, where my father was just a father, where our house was a home and not a cage. But these were just fantasies, fleeting moments of escape, before the reality of his footsteps in the hall brought the terror crashing back down. I felt like I was suffocating, drowning in the placid suburban horror of it all. I learned to live in my own head, to build worlds where I was safe, where I was loved, but it was a lonely existence, and with each passing year, the walls of my inner world felt thinner, and the monster on the other side felt closer and more real. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that something terrible was coming. I was a lamb being fattened for a slaughter, and the butcher and his wife were the only two people I was supposed to trust in the world. I was 16 when the storm that had been gathering for my entire life finally broke. It was a hot, suffocating summer in Cincinnati, the kind where the air is so thick with humidity it feels hard to breathe. My mother had gone to visit her sister for the weekend, a rare occurrence. She'd left a list of chores for me on the kitchen counter, and a cold, dismissive kiss on my forehead. "Be good for your father," she'd said, her eyes refusing to meet mine. I remember the silence in the house after she left. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of an empty home. It was a heavy, menacing silence, charged with unspoken possibility. I spent the day cleaning, scrubbing floors and polishing furniture, trying to make myself as small and useful as possible. I hoped that if I was productive enough, he would leave me alone. It was a foolish, childish hope. That night, Tyler came home late, the smell of beer and cheap cologne clinging to him like a shroud. He didn't speak to me at first, just moved through the house with a restless, predatory energy. I tried to stay in my room, my door locked, a book open in my lap that I wasn't reading, but the lock on my door was old and flimsy, a token gesture of privacy that he had always allowed, but never respected. He knocked once, a hard, demanding rap that made my heart leap into my throat. "Margaret," he called, his voice slurred but firm. "Open this door." I didn't answer. I sat frozen on my bed, my hands clenched into fists, praying he would go away. He didn't. I heard the jiggle of the doorknob, a moment of pressure, and then the sickening crack of the old wood giving way. The door swung open, and he stood there, silhouetted against the hallway light, his face a mask of dark intent. I can't write down the details of what happened next. The memory is a black hole in my mind, a place of such profound terror and violation that my brain has walled it off. I remember the pain, I remember the feeling of being utterly powerless, of my body no longer being my own. I remember the ceiling fan turning slowly above me, its rhythmic whir, the only sound in a world that had gone completely silent. I remember dissociating, my mind floating away to a corner of the room, watching the scene unfold as if it were happening to someone else, a girl in a movie I couldn't turn off. When it was over, he stood up, straightened his shirt, and looked down at me with an expression that was not remorseful, but triumphant. "You're my daughter," he said, the words a final branding iron on my soul. "You will always be mine." Then he walked out, leaving me broken and bleeding on the bedspread my mother had picked out. I lay there for hours unmoving. As the summer night wore on, the world had irrevocably shifted. The vague, creeping horror of my childhood had finally coalesced into a single concrete act of monstrousness. He had taken the last part of me that was untouched, the last sanctuary of my own self. I was no longer just a prisoner in his house. I was a territory he had conquered and claimed. The next morning, I moved like an automaton. I showered, scrubbing my skin until it was raw, trying to wash away his touch, his scent, his presence. But it was inside me now, a poison that had seeped into my very bone. When my mother came home that evening, she found me sitting in the living room, staring at a blank television screen. "Did you finish your chores?" was the first thing she asked. I just nodded. She looked at me for a moment, a flicker of something annoyance, concern in her. "You look pale," she said. "I hope you're not getting sick." I didn't tell her. How could I? The words were trapped in my throat, choked by the certainty that she would not believe me, that she would blame me, that she would find a way to make his crime my fault. And so the silence continued, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of a grave. 2 months after that terrible night, my body began to betray the secret I was desperately trying to keep. I started feeling sick in the mornings, a deep rolling nausea that I couldn't control. My clothes started to feel tight, my body changing in ways that terrified me. I knew, with a dawning horror that felt like drowning, what was happening. I was pregnant with my father's child. The thought was so monstrous, so fundamentally wrong, that my mind could barely contain it. I was carrying the physical embodiment of his crime inside me. I was a walking, breathing tomb for his sin. For weeks I lived in a state of numb panic. I wore baggy sweaters, even in the late summer heat, trying to hide the changes from my mother's prying eyes. I spent more and more time in my room, pleading illness, trying to become invisible again. But you can't hide a life growing inside you. One evening, after a particularly bad bout of morning sickness that lasted all day, my mother cornered me in the hallway. Her eyes were narrow, suspicious. "What is wrong with you, Margaret?" she demanded. "You've been acting strangely for weeks. Are you on drugs?" "No, Mama," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Then what is it? Tell me," she snapped, her patience gone. The truth came out in a choked, desperate sob. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "I'm pregnant," I whispered, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. For a split second her face registered shock, but it was quickly replaced by something else, something cold and hard and full of fury. Her eyes scanned my body, lingering on my stomach, and her expression curdled into one of pure disgust. "Who?" she hissed, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "Who did this to you?" I couldn't say his name. I couldn't form the word Dad. I just looked at her, my eyes pleading with her to see, to understand, to somehow know without me having to say the unspeakable. But she didn't want to know the truth. She wanted a simple villain, an outside threat she could blame. "Was it that boy from down the street, the one who works at the Target?" she pressed, her voice rising. "I knew you were sneaking around. You foolish, stupid girl. You've ruined everything." And then she hit me. It wasn't a slap. It was a full-fisted blow to the side of my head, so hard that my ears rang, and stars exploded behind my eyes. I stumbled backward, crashing against the wall. "You brought this shame into my house," she screamed, her face contorted with a rage I had never seen before. She hit me again, and again, her hands becoming weapons of her own denial. The beatings became a new part of our routine. She beat me for the shame. She beat me for the gossip she imagined from the neighbors. She beat me for shattering her perfect, curated life. She never once asked me if I was okay. She never once asked me who the father was again. She didn't want to know. It was easier to believe I was a promiscuous, reckless girl than to face the reality that the man she slept next to every night was a monster. Tyler, for his part, was eerily calm. He watched the beatings with a detached interest, a silent observer to the violence his actions had unleashed. He never intervened. He never told her to stop. In his eyes, I saw a chilling satisfaction. My pregnancy had created a new buffer between them. My mother's rage was now fully directed at me, leaving him untouched, unblamed, safe in his role as the disappointed patriarch. I was trapped between two abusers, the one who had violated my body, and the one who was now punishing me for it. My home was no longer just a prison, it had become a torture chamber, and as the baby grew inside me, a life I never asked for, I realized with a terrifying clarity that if I didn't find a way out, neither of us would survive. The 9 months of my pregnancy were the longest, darkest winter of my soul. The house on that quiet street in Cincinnati became a hermetically sealed world of pain and fear. I was not allowed to leave, except for carefully supervised trips to a doctor my mother had found in another town, a place where no one would know our name. She would sit in the waiting room, with a grim, tight-lipped expression, as if she were my warden, not my mother. At home, the abuse was a constant, unpredictable storm. My mother's violence was erratic, triggered by the smallest things. A dish I didn't wash quickly enough, a look she misinterpreted as defiance, the sight of my growing belly. The beatings were her way of purging her own shame, of punishing me for the secret she refused to acknowledge. "Look at you," she would sneer, her voice dripping with contempt. A disgrace. My father, Tyler, treated me with a chilling mixture of possessiveness and disgust. He would watch me, his eyes lingering on my changing body, with a look I couldn't decipher, a grotesque parody of paternal interest. He never touched me again in that way, but his presence was a constant violation. He was the architect of my misery, and he seemed to revel in the chaos he had created, safe behind the shield of my mother's fury. I learned to live in a state of high alert, my senses attuned to the slightest shift in their mood. I became an expert in de-escalation, in apology, in making myself as small and unnoticeable as possible. My bedroom was my only refuge, but even there, I was not safe. They would barge in without knocking, searching for some imagined transgression. The world outside ceased to exist. I was pulled out of school. My mother told the principal I had a severe case of mono, and would be finishing my studies at home. It was a lie. Of course, I spent my days staring out my bedroom window, watching other teenagers walk by, laughing, living the life that had been stolen from me. The loneliness was a physical entity, a weight that pressed down on my chest and made it hard to breathe. Amidst all this darkness, a tiny defiant spark began to glow within me. It was the baby. At first I had resented its presence, this living proof of my trauma, but as I felt the first flutter of movement, a tiny kick against my ribs, something shifted. This was not just a symbol of his crime. This was a life, a separate, innocent being, who was as much a victim as I was. This tiny unborn child became my reason to survive. For this baby, I had to find a way out. My plan began to form in secret, in the dead of night, when the house was finally still. It was a desperate, fragile thing, built from scraps of hope and whispered prayer. I started saving the few dollars my mother would occasionally give me for personal items, hiding the bills in the lining of an old textbook. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I started listening more carefully to the world outside my window. I memorized the schedule of the city bus that passed at the end of our street. I noted the times when my parents were most likely to be out of the house, or distracted. Every small detail was a piece of a puzzle, the puzzle of my escape. The biggest challenge was finding someone to help me. I had no friends, no one to call, but then I remembered a woman from our old church, a woman my mother had always disliked, calling her a busybody. Her name was Monica. She ran a small outreach program for troubled youth. My mother had once mocked her, saying, "Why would anyone want to spend their time with those broken kids?" I now knew why.
because sometimes the broken ones are the only ones who understand. I found her number in an old church directory I'd hidden in my closet. The thought of calling her was terrifying. What if she didn't believe me? What if she called my parents? The risk was enormous, but the risk of staying was great. One afternoon, when my mother was at the Walmart, and my father was at work, I crept downstairs, my heart pounding, and dialed her number. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely press the buttons. When she answered, her voice was warm and kind. "Hello, this is Monica." I took a deep, shuddering breath, and the words came tumbling out. "My name is Margaret," I whispered. I think I need help." The place Monica took me was called Heaven. It was a simple, unassuming brick building, on a quiet street, a shelter for pregnant and parenting teens who had nowhere else to go. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt different. It was filled with the sounds of babies cooing and girls laughing, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of my own home. It was clean, warm and safe. My room was small, but it had a window that opened to a little garden, and most importantly, a door that locked from the inside. That first night, I slept for 12 hours straight, a deep, dreamless sleep, the first I'd had in years. Waking up without the familiar knot of fear in my stomach was a disorienting, beautiful feeling. Monica was there every step of the way. She became the mother I never had. She brought me clothes, books, and helped me enroll in the shelter's high school equivalency program. She sat with me during my prenatal appointments, holding my hand, explaining the doctor's words in a way I could understand. The legal case against my parents was swift and brutal. The evidence was overwhelming. My testimony, the doctor's reports detailing the bruises from my mother's beatings, and the DNA test that was ordered to establish paternity, all painted a damning picture. Tyler tried to lie, to deny everything, but the science was irrefutable. Nancy, in a desperate attempt to save herself, tried to claim she had no idea about the abuse from my father, that she thought my bruises were from me being clumsy. No one believed her. Their carefully constructed world of suburban respectability came crashing down around. My father was arrested and charged with multiple counts of felony abuse. He was sentenced to a long prison term, a number of years that felt both vast and insufficient to cover the lifetime of pain he had caused. My mother was charged with child endangerment and assault. She received a shorter sentence, but the conviction meant she lost her job at the local school library. Their names were in the local paper. Their perfect facade was shattered for the whole world to see. The house, the one they had cared more about than their own daughter, was sold to cover their legal fees. They lost everything. There was a quiet, solemn justice in that. They had tried to make me invisible, to erase me, and in the end, they were the ones who were disgraced and dispossessed. 3 months after my escape, I gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby boy. I named him Samuel, which means heard by God. Holding him in my arms for the first time, I felt a love so fierce and protective it took my breath away. He was not a symbol of my trauma. He was a symbol of my survival. He was the reason I had found the courage to break free. Life at Haven House with a newborn was challenging, but I was not alone. I was surrounded by other young women who understood. We were a makeshift family, a tribe of survivors, helping each other with late-night feedings, sharing stories, and offering a support that was real and unconditional. I finished my high school degree, and, with Monica's encouragement, enrolled in a community college program for nursing. I wanted to spend my life helping people, to be the person for others that Monica had been for me. The years that followed were a quiet, steady process of rebuilding. It wasn't easy. There were nightmares. There were days when the weight of the past felt heavy. But for every bad day, there were 100 good ones. There was Samuel's first word, his first step, the sound of his laughter, filling our small apartment. There was the pride of earning my nursing degree, of walking across a stage to accept a diploma that represented so much more than academic achievement. It was a testament to my resilience. I had not just survived, I was beginning to thrive. Years melted into a decade, then life settled into a rhythm of work, love, and quiet gratitude. I became a damn good nurse, working in the pediatric wing of a hospital, in a town far away from Cincinnati. I found a special joy in caring for children, in being a source of comfort and safety for them. I made sure every child who came through my ward felt seen, heard, and protected. It was my way of healing myself, of giving back the kindness that had been so freely given to me. Samuel grew from a happy baby into a bright, compassionate young man. He was everything his biological father was not: gentle, respectful, and kind. He knew his story. I told him the truth when he was old enough to understand, not to burden him, but to arm him with the knowledge of where he came from, and the strength it took for us to get here. He never faltered in his love for me. He became my greatest champion, my proudest accomplishment. I never married. I had relationships, but a part of me remained guarded, a fortress I could never fully dismantle. My primary focus was always Samuel, ensuring he had the stable, loving childhood I never did. Our little apartment became a true home, filled with books, music, and the smell of my Sunday meatloaf, a tradition I reclaimed and made my own. As for Tyler and Nancy, their lives unraveled completely. My father served his time and was released, an old, broken man who no one wanted to hire. He drifted from town to town, working odd jobs, a ghost haunted by his own monstrosity. I heard through Monica, who kept tabs on them, from a distance, that he died alone in a cheap motel room, in a city I'd never heard of. I felt nothing when I heard the news. No sadness, no triumph, just a quiet finality. My mother Nancy fared little better. After her release, she tried to rebuild her life, but the shame followed her everywhere. She lost her friends, her social standing, her purpose. She ended up living in a small, run-down apartment, bitter and isolated, a prisoner of her own choice. She tried to contact me once, a single rambling letter, filled with self-pity and blame. She never once said she was sorry for what she did, only for what had happened to her. I never wrote back. I had long since accepted that the mother I had needed and deserved had never really existed. The poetic justice of their fate was not something I reveled in, but it was something I acknowledged. They had built their lives on a foundation of cruelty and lies, and it had crumbled to dust, just as it was always meant. They had chosen power over love, and in the end, they were left with nothing. My power, I discovered, came from a different source. It came from breaking the cycle. It came from raising a son who knew how to love and respect women. It came from building a life of purpose and peace out of the ashes of my past. The day Samuel told me he was going to be a father, I wept. They were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. He had married a wonderful woman, a high school history teacher named Clara, and seeing them together, so full of love and mutual respect, was a gift beyond measure. When my granddaughter, Lily, was born, I held her in my arms and felt the last of the shadows in my heart recede. Here she was, the next generation, a life born not from violence and shame, but from love and hope. I was a grandmother. The word itself felt like a miracle. I retired from nursing shortly after Lily was born, so I could be a full-time grandma, a role I embraced with every fiber of my being. I spoiled her with cuddles and stories, and home-baked cookies. I taught her how to plant flowers in the garden of the small house I had finally bought for myself, a house with a big front porch and a swing. My life had come full circle, but this time, the circle was one of love, not pain. One afternoon, as Lily, then about 5 years old, was sitting on my lap on the porch swing, she looked up at me with her big, curious eyes. "Grandma," she asked, "were you ever a little girl?" I smiled and smoothed her hair. "Yes, sweetie, a long, long time ago." "Were you happy?" she asked, her question so simple and yet so profound. I thought for a moment, not about the darkness, but about the journey. I thought about the fear and the escape, the struggle and the survival, the healing and the rebuild. I thought about the quiet strength I had found within myself, the love I had cultivated in my son, and the pure joy I now held in my arms. I wasn't always happy, I told her honestly, my voice soft, but I learned how to. I learned that you can build a new life, a beautiful life, even when you start with broken pieces.
Lily nodded, accepting my answer with the easy wisdom of a child, and then she laid her head against my chest. I wrapped my arms around her, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair, and looked out at my little garden. The roses were in full bloom, their petals a vibrant, defiant red against the green leaves. They were a testament to the fact that beautiful things can grow even in the most difficult soil. My father had tried to destroy me. My mother had tried to break me. They thought they had succeeded, but they were wrong. They had not buried a victim. They had planted a seed, and from that seed, a new family tree had grown, its roots deep in resilience, its branches reaching for the sun, strong, beautiful, and